Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr., and today we're welcoming Reverend Kinsie Tate to the show. Kinsie is the founder and executive director of Restore Clergy, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support clergy with programs that improve wellness to cultivate faithful and sustainable ministry. She is a licensed professional clinical counselor and has a private practice where she has facilitated growth and transformation for clients for over a decade. She completed her MDiv at Phillips Seminary and was ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in 2007. She served as an associate minister for 3 years prior to returning to complete her Master of Education in Applied Behavioral Studies at Oklahoma City University in 2010. She became a licensed professional counselor in Oklahoma in 2012 and a licensed professional clinical counselor in California in 2021. She was certified as a Truce Coach in 2022. She lives in California with her spouse, who is United Methodist clergy, serving in a local congregation, and their 3 school-age children. All right, welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr., and I am recording again from Phillips Seminary in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and pleased to be joined today by the Reverend Kinsie Tate. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. We already had a great conversation before we started recording, so hopefully some of that might make it into this conversation here. Share, if you would, just kind of about yourself and what makes you you.
So I'm currently living in California, but I am originally a Texan, and then I was in Oklahoma for like 17 years because my husband is an Okie, and I went to Phillips Seminary, and so that's where we met, and we were both in ministry in Oklahoma for a while. After that, I was in ministry for 3 years, and then really kind of realized that pulpit ministry, traditional, what we think about as ministry was not the best fit for me. But I really loved the premarital counseling and some of the one-on-one work that I was doing with congregants. And so I went back and got a master's and became a therapist. And that is absolutely my jam. I love it. It is such a better fit, and it really does feel like ministry. But I was really just kind of in the secular realm of that. I did have people that, they came to me because they liked church talk and all that kind of stuff, and I understood it. But yeah, like we're in California now. He's in a church. I have my private practice, and then I also started Restore Clergy. So we have 3 kids. That's a lot of work, and that's another reason why I transitioned to do something else, because I had more flexibility. And so those are the things that we're doing right now. Definitely staying busy.
Yeah, we'll be talking about your work here with Restore Clergy in a bit. Share, if you would, kind of about your faith journey, what that's looked like in the past and what that looks like today.
Yeah, so I grew up disciples, but I did not know that was a denomination. I thought we were non-denominational. I went to
Interesting.
Yeah, I went to First Christian Church. My parents, I think my dad was kind of loosely Episcopalian, and I don't really know what my mom was, but when they got to the little town I grew up in, they found the Christian church and they just liked it. It was a good fit. Mm-hmm. So even when I went to college and I was involved in the campus ministry, I still thought we were non-denominational. And my best friend was like, no, it's a denomination. I was like, oh. So, I was always involved in the church, had really strong youth group. And then when I went to college, I was involved in the Disciple Student Fellowship on campus of UT Austin. That's where I went to school. And my campus minister, as I was in school to be an art educator, because I was like, I love art, but it's got to be practical, she was like, I think you have a call on your life. And I was like, what? What are you talking about?
Right.
And so I went to seminary thinking I'm going to be a missionary and I'm going to travel around the world. Yeah. And I was actually just talking to Myrna Jones here at Phillips, and she always kind of laughed and thought that was, I don't want to be patronizing, but it's like kind of cute.
Yeah.
One of those things of like wide-eyed and thinking those things. But like I said, I went into traditional church ministry. And there were things I liked about it, but there were a lot of things that I didn't, that were hard. Mm-hmm. It was back in the late 2000s, into the 2010s. And that shift into the church is really changing. Yeah. How is this going to be sustainable? What am I doing? That kind of thing just felt really bad. And so I made a shift. And I really do feel like God called me to be a therapist. It is definitely living into my giftedness. And so, the circling all the way back to, I'd done that for 12 years. I still continue to do that. And now Restore Clergy is kind of bringing everything together.
Yeah, it really
which
is.
is awesome.
Well, for our actual non-denominational listeners, Kinsie and I are both ordained in the denomination of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Where we're recording today is a seminary in the Christian Church denomination tradition. So I always like to say shout out to the home team today. We're playing for the home team today.
Yeah.
Spiritual practice that's been meaningful for you might recommend?
So something that I really love, what I have discovered is a type of mindfulness I do is really about movement. Mm-hmm. So I've tried traditional like meditation, and I have a really hard time with that. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't just need to practice it.
Right.
But what really works well for me is walking out in nature. So where I live right now, in Newport Beach, California, we have a beautiful place to live. And so I can go and walk along trails or, just in our neighborhood. And that for me really helps calm down my nervous system and really helps me, like if I'm feeling jittery, like maybe I had too much caffeine, need to burn some of that off. That really helps me. And I also really experience the divine and the holy and moments of awe and joy out in nature. And I always have. And so that is my go-to spiritual practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. So, we're recording, again, like I said, live today from Phillips Seminary, and we're at the Remind and Renew conference here, and it's in January. So if you'd like to check out any of the sessions, I think they should be available for recording. The interview we'll have released before this with Reverend Dr. Session. I also have an interview with Dr. Thelma, who spoke here. You can check out for our listeners a few episodes prior. But Kinsie's here to talk about her work with Restore Clergy. So we're going to have this conversation, and I'm frankly a little nervous because I'll try not to be, hopefully my stuff doesn't get revealed too much, and this isn't turned into a counseling session. But why don't you talk just to begin, talk about like how Restore Clergy came about, what really was driving you and motivating you to do it.
Yeah, so it was, kind of like I mentioned, it really was a spirit-led kind of culmination of all of the knowledge I have, all of the experience I have. So my husband and I were in Oklahoma, and he was in January of 2020 in LA at a church leadership conference.
Yeah.
He's United Methodist. And so there they were discussing with the bishop, and the bishop, made a comment about like having churches out here and all that kind of stuff. And so he just called me, and it was literally January 10th of 2020. I remember the day. And he said, like the bishop made this comment, like, what do you think about that? And I was like, okay, like, why not? Like, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's go. So, we were in LA County, in like Glendale, which is adjacent to LA, on March 15th of 2020 when it shut down. And we were there for the seating, at his church. And so, we were going to make a family vacation out of it. It was spring break. We're going to take our kids to Disney.
Yeah.
That changed. We were going to fly. That changed. So we drove all the way there and then all the way back in like 48 hours. Yeah. So it was a real intense period of time, but it was COVID. I mean, it was like lockdown COVID.
Right.
So we were like, all that anxiety on top of, the anxiety of starting at a new church, moving across the country. Yeah. And just the cultural shift from like Oklahoma City to basically LA. So that summer we did that. And, I like to joke that we were like the Beverly Hillbillies, just like going out there and, with our kids and all our stuff. And so that really began I don't know how to really describe it. And I'm in this space right now where I'm really starting to reflect on that as I tell this story multiple times. What I'm realizing is like, that was a lot bigger deal than I realized at the time. Like when you're in it, you just go and you just do it. And it's like, we got 3 kids, we got to figure this out, whatever.
Right.
You just go. And now I really think I'm in this space of getting into stability, and I'm reflecting on like, that was a big freaking deal.
Yeah, it was really hard.
It was really, really hard. Yeah. And so out of that, I'm pretty sure I was depressed. It's the whole thing of like, I'm a therapist and I know what depression is, but it's really hard to see it in yourself. But I knew something was not okay. And so I was going through actually a coaching program. It was called Truce with Food. And then there's a certification that's called Truce. And I did the certification, and that's what Restore Clergy, that's the foundation of it. And then just bringing in all of my other knowledge to create this curriculum to deal with burnout.
Yeah.
And what I'm realizing is I really just thought it was my husband, Chris, that was like burnout. And I'm like, no, girl, you were burned out too. It just looked different. So that is really kind of where the passion came from. And then I was part of the NBA Scent cohort, and that's a social entrepreneurial program. And they really helped me form Restore Clergy into a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So before I was just going to kind of do it out of my private practice, and I was working with individuals, but then I had this opportunity, and people were like, that's really a great thing. Like this is really needed, because we all had the data about clergy burnout,
right?
Like it's all there, but there aren't a ton of programs that are actually addressing it. And it's like, I can do this, and I want to do this, and I feel called to do this. So that program really helped me create Restore Clergy as a 501c3. So with that, the beauty of that is that I can get donations to help offset the cost for clergy, because we know clergy don't like a lot of money.
Right.
But because the program's a year long, because there are 2 in-person retreats, and I feel like those are really important to build cohesion, to build safety for the cohort. It's costly.
Yeah.
And so it is a commitment, but already the people that are in the program are talking about how just after the in-person retreat at the very beginning, how much better they feel.
Yeah.
How much they feel. I had them take I think it's the Francis Burnout Inventory. It's called the FBI.
Okay.
So I'm kind of tracking data, but I had them take that, and due to a clerical error, they had to take it before and then right after the in-person retreat, and they're already there's already reduction.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see after the year-long.
You might keep that method going.
Yeah. That's actually, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good idea. Yeah. The only thing is I don't know whose is whose. That's why I had to have them retake it. Oh. So it was just me learning technology,
I mean, it's kind of like, that's good though. It's kind of like a blind study then, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So all of that stuff, like tracking data, because I do want to understand. I love the numbers. I'm not a researcher. I am at heart, but the statistics and all that kind of stuff are not my strength. But I do like to notice and I want to see what areas is it impacting? Where do I maybe need to make adjustments? How can I grow? I'm very much a person that's like, okay, this is an experiment and we're going to learn what we can learn. And then we're going to grow and change and make it even better. And I am getting even better like as I do this. And so
Right.
I even think about that in my individual sessions of what am I learning from my clients and how is that helping me to grow as a therapist and as a person? Because I learn things about myself in even these conversations we're having right now. Just like I said, I'm like, I am just really realizing how impactful that burnout was on me and how much that experience being at that congregation helped me to learn about myself. But it takes time for us to process this. And that's another reason why the program's a year long.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are like, that's a really long time. It's a big commitment.
Right.
But really, it's just like twice a month via Zoom in the middle. And then the retreats are really meant to be like rest and renewal retreats. And maybe thinking of it as like, if you don't have sabbatical, maybe this is a sabbatical light kind of option.
Right. So let's dive into the topic of burnout. Again, speaking of this conference we're at, we just saw a presentation by Dr. Thumma talking about some, what I found fairly startling statistics, or at least troubling. He spoke about a pretty significant rise in clergy discontent, about 20%, I want to say, over 2 years. And then also, interestingly, a pretty significant decline from church attendees about their willingness to change. So
my theory around this is, I think, and it's interesting that his research is about how the pandemic is impacting people.
Right.
Because I think that directly correlates with how the pandemic is impacting people. Because everyone's overwhelmed.
Right.
And everyone, I think the pandemic actually gave us a break for a lot of people. A forced pause that for some people was really traumatizing, and really raised anxiety. But some people, they were like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
like this
true.
is so hard. Like, why am I killing myself at this job to get all these things that don't make me happy, or like go on these like vacations where I'm stressed because I'm like trying to make it an epic vacation, because I get like one a year, kind of thing. And so I think it caused people to reflect on what's important and what's meaningful. And I think people want that from the church, but clergy are exhausted. Clergy, it's really a challenging job. Like you have to be an administrator, a public speaker, like pastoral, a therapist,
community organizer.
Yeah,
activist.
fundraising.
We talked about, or this was talked about, what, I think yesterday, about are the models of clergy changing from what, priest, prophet, preacher, to activist, community organizer. I forgot the other one.
Right. And I think that is a extremely daunting task for individuals.
Right.
And so often clergy go into ministry because they had a great experience in the local church.
Right.
And then you get into leadership and you no longer have the community because of, boundaries, expectations, all of those kinds of things. And so you're in this space of like, we're supposed to love each other. This is a community. We're supposed to support each other, but I am set apart and I am so isolated and alone.
Yeah.
And it's a beating.
Right.
And so, I think the statistics are a direct representation of people in the pews are needing more because they're overwhelmed and they're noticing how dissatisfied they are. And then clergy are in the same space, but clergy don't have the capacity to meet that growing need. And so then everybody's like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Like it's going through the motions because as human beings, we need ritual, we need tradition. That's important, but it's hollow right now in this space. And I don't know how long that will last. I don't know what that will look like moving into the future. And I'm not saying it's universal because Dr. Sessions was talking about yesterday, her community the gathering, that sounds amazing. I'm like, oh, I want to get online and, be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so there are places that are maybe cutting edge, or maybe they have something else going on. Maybe it is a central focus and identity that really is helpful. And I think a lot of mainline denominations, especially because there was a lot of transition with COVID for clergy moving, because it was such a hard experience with ideologies and conflict, that people are like, you know what, I'm just going to move. I can't deal with this conflict. It's too much. It feels too big. So I'm just going to shift to somewhere else and start over. But in that, being in a period of transition is really unsettling. And it's like, where's our identity in that? And as a new leader in a new context, I want to respect what the community wants, but then also I have my own ideas, and how do we bring those together? And then how do we grieve what we've lost?
Right.
And I think we don't really do that well either. So I think all of those things kind of lead to the statistics that we saw in Dr. Thumma's research.
Yeah. So let's go about it this way, because I think one of the interesting things, and I sat in on Kinsie's presentation yesterday, and I think one of the things that I appreciate about your work is that it's not just like blame COVID, blame this, blame that, blame the churches, which, let's be frank, like there is plenty of blame to go around, that we need to change systems and work for more equality and justice in some contexts that can lead to a lot of clergy frustration and burnout and wounding. But you talk about like some of our own stuff, which I'm hesitating because I know my own stuff. And I won't share what it is yesterday, but like I'm watching, or, I'm in this presentation with Kinsie, and she's going through these 3 ways. Maybe we should talk about this here. These 3 ways that clergy tend to deal with stress or conflict. And I'm like, oh man, that is me. It's like that Facebook meme, like, report this picture because that's me and I don't like it. Like, I was like,
too close to home.
Too close to home. So if you know me well, you may be able to guess what it is. I will not reveal for sake of boundaries, my own personal boundaries. But let's talk about, you list, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it kind of reminds me of like, you use different words, but kind of reminds me of like the fight, flight, or freeze. You use compete, avoid, and accommodate. So talk about the ways that, what that might look like for clergy.
Yeah. So, and what I'll say about compete, avoid, and accommodate, one, they come from Ali Shapiro's work, which is the truth certification I went through. That's part of her framework, but it's not just clergy. It is a universal human response. And what I love about doing the stress response discussion and talking about it is always different depending on the group. And people, there are always aha moments that I love so much. Just in that like hour conversation, people are like, oh my gosh, that is, stop looking into my brain. Like you like pinpointed it. I'm like, yeah, because it's universal.
I was just like, Kinsie, can you see how quiet I am right now?
Yes.
Like, is it that obvious that I'm like, oh, bleep.
Right. And so often, like there are some people that will share, but then other people that are really quiet, and I'm like, they're processing. I see the wheels turning, and really looking at it as the goal. And the goal of Restore Clergy, the Restore program, is to help people identify what is the stuff that you are bringing to the table. And when I say, like, compete, avoid, and accommodate, they're just typical stress responses where we get into these dichotomies. So like it's all or nothing, good, bad, fantasy, catastrophe, all of those kinds of things. And when we are in that space, we lose creativity, we lose connection, we lose compassion, we lose courage.
Yeah.
We go into a, what I call locked and loaded, we are in a defensive state, and it is so hard to feel the movement of the spirit in that space. It is so hard to see people in their woundedness because our woundedness is butting up against theirs. And, it is the more that we can, so my goal is the more that I can help leaders of congregations figure their own stuff out. My hope is in that, then they can help their people do that. And then if their people can do that, if congregations can do that, what can we do out in the community? How can we help the world understand, this is your stuff. This is my stuff. I'm going to deal with my stuff so that I can help you deal with your stuff.
Yeah.
Rather than like, you're bad. I hate you.
Right.
You're a hateful, awful person. I'm like, no, probably you're just in a defensive maneuver and you're scared.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be vulnerable.
Right.
And I think especially in the world that we live in with these like snippets of moments, it takes time for our nervous systems to calm down and to allow us to connect with other people. And we can absolutely do that virtually. But there's just something about being in person and being in someone else's presence that speeds that process up. So that's why Restore is a hybrid. It's like, functionality, and practicality. Virtual's awesome, but we also need time to be in each other's space to really be like, I don't know, let me get a feel for you. Like, let me see how I feel about you kind of thing.
Well, and if I can make a pro-church moment, like this is probably also, I think, why going to church matters and being in community with people is because we can kind of like, oh, they're a human being like me.
Right. And it's those in-between conversations, like the hallway conversations, like just those acknowledging other people, just even a smile, walking down the hall. Those moments are lost. And then we're so isolated, like working from home. And again, hybrid models are amazing. And I think they are desperately needed because then we can also find community with people across the country, across the world, and find like-minded community there. But there is something about being like in someone else's presence that I think does things physiologically that we don't fully understand.
Right.
I mean, I know there's lots of research on it. I don't know what all of it is, but it makes a lot of sense to me, thinking about that. And so there is, I think that's where the church can really shine. But it is maybe how do we facilitate that in a way that is, still spreading the news of like Jesus Christ and that, dealing with worthlessness and belonging, which are, again, core fundamental things that I see. Jesus is a great salve for all of that and can really, you can carry that around with you and have that community around that central driving force.
So one of the things I really appreciate / hate about your model is that it really is like what can I control? And you work from an internal family systems lens, as I understand. I'm like to say I'm a student of family systems theory, so there's some crossover there, obviously. But I think from my context, and I know I'm guilty of this myself, there can be so much of like, it's their fault, they're screwing me over, it's the system. And again, I don't want to diminish or dismiss the very real prejudice and bias and oppression and injustice that people do encounter. But I think it's also important, and from my perspective, I don't think we're getting enough of this idea of like building up our own resiliency.
Yeah.
So why do you think that's so important?
I think when we are more resilient and it's so much of understanding what I call our stuff. It's because it allows us to interact in the world and with other people to use IFS, internal family systems language, from a place of self. So capital S self, our true self. And when we're in that place, there's curiosity, there's connection, there's compassion, there's courage.
Yeah.
So, and there's 8 C's. So you can look that up if you want to.
Yeah, I'm like, I got to write that down, but I guess I'll look it up.
It's in, we talk about it in Restore, but it's just internal family systems model, the 8 C's. So why that's important is because then we have more clarity about what is a systemic issue and what is mine.
Wow.
And if we can understand what is ours, then it doesn't control us and we have more clarity.
Yeah.
And we can interact with the systemic issues from a place of, again, courage is the best in clarity rather than defensiveness and anger and vitriol and resentment. So it's not like it gets rid of the brokenness in our systems.
Right.
But I think we aren't as triggered by it. We aren't as defensive. We aren't as we can come at it more from a place of like, okay, so I see this. Do you see this?
Right.
We can help other people see this. And then as a collective, and coming at it a place from there is collective wisdom in the group. How do we address this rather than like a defensive space of like, how am I going to get mine?
Right.
How am I going to keep myself safe? Which I think I totally get.
Yeah.
Like we are physical beings, we are bonding mammals, like all of those self-protective maneuvers absolutely make sense. And if we can move into that space of higher spirituality, like seeing the how we are alike rather than how we are different.
Yeah.
Man, the collective wisdom there and what we could do. But so many people are in a space of I've got to protect myself. And again, I come at this from a place of privilege. Like I don't have as many of those forces operating against me. And so that's another reason why this is so important to me, because I have more capacity. And maybe I can help people that don't have as much capacity to increase their capacity, to understand what is yours, what can you deal with, and what is just the broken system. And once we have that clarity, then it doesn't feel so personal and it doesn't shut us down.
Let me ask this then, like, what do you think, what's a helpful, question or framework for a pastor to think about, like, is this me or is this the system?
Yeah. So what I have found to be really helpful, if it feels the level of intensity is really a warning of, and also so some people don't feel their feelings very well. A lot of people, and I think a lot of pastors in general, are pretty cognitive.
Yeah.
So if you don't, like maybe if you feel really angry or you feel really sad, and maybe you notice your thoughts, maybe you've got a lot of self-critical thoughts, or maybe there's a lot of critical thoughts of someone else. That can be a warning light that it's like, I think my stuff is active right now, but for me, it's really kind of a body sense of if I feel restricted, if I feel confined, like we want to look for a place of like expansion, a place of abundance, a place of there is enough. And God is in this place and God provides like bounty and all of that kind of stuff. So if we can shift into that place, and it's a felt sense, it's not about how much money we have, the house that we live in, like physical safety. It's more of like a felt sense of I am okay. Like I am going to be okay. And that's when I know that I'm in more of a self place, because it's a feeling. But anytime you feel real intense emotions, I think that's a pretty good indication that it's like, oh, I got some extra stuff going on here. This is about me. And it may not be just about you, but your stuff is definitely active in the interaction.
Okay, here's another question I'm thinking about. There's a guy who specializes in family systems theory, Steve Cuss, who will hopefully going to work on getting back on the pod. He has a phrase, and I think he has a book coming out to this point about like how, especially for clergy, what we say we believe about God does not actually match how we live. And he talks about like internally, like we think that God is loving, compassion, but we can have a real harsh self-critique. Do you see that play out? Do you think with clergy? I mean, obviously, someone like Steve Cuss, he's working from a more traditional evangelical framework theologically, but I think this idea even really plays out in mainline or progressive spaces where we have such an abundant, loving view of God. Yet I'm not sure similarly if clergy like live that out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, what I'm thinking of as you're asking the question is, I think when we are at our best, so we are in that, again, that self space,
Mm-hmm.
we truly do experience God in that way, as loving, as abundant, as moments of awe and moments of joy.
Right.
But it's when our stuff is active and when we're acting out of a place of scarcity, we're acting out of a place of fear and anxiety, that's when it doesn't match up. And that makes a lot of sense for me because we don't have access to like the Holy Spirit in that place. We are in a place of self-preservation. It's such a human experience. And I think what's hard about that is we don't even realize we're doing it. And especially if you're in a place of burnout, it's like, that's what you're living in. And so you can feel hypocritical. You can feel like, how do I talk about a loving God when it's like, this sucks.
Yeah.
Like, this person in the pew reminds me of my dad who used to yell at me, and I am all kinds of triggered and I have no interest in being compassionate to them. Like that is fundamentally a human response.
Yeah.
And I think what's hard for clergy is like, we are expected to transcend that and to be able to speak of God's loving kindness. And it's like, I'm not feeling it at all. It's really hard to speak about it and not feel, like I said, I can't think of a better word, but hypocritical, which can then wear on you.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of people leave the church, because it's like, I can't live out what I'm preaching and it just feels so bad.
Yeah. Right. Cause it's like the, I don't know if you heard this when you were in seminary here, but it went around when I was in seminary here. Like going to seminary is like training to be a chef, learning how to cook. But then pastoring a church is like running your own restaurant. Like there's some elements of cooking involved in running a restaurant, perhaps. But all those elements of running a restaurant can be like, man, this is not what I wanted to do. And it can feel, or conversely, running a church when you're like obsessed with budget. And I don't know, maybe this is something that I need to work on, but I imagine for many pastors, it's like, I want to get paid. Like I want to be able to pay my mortgage or my rent.
Right.
So like I'm stressing about money. And it's like, this isn't what I signed up for kind of thing. Right.
Right. Well, if we don't feel safe, thinking about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if our basic needs aren't being met, which if we don't have enough money to feel secure in our ability to pay our rent and like allow our children to do extracurricular activities or like go to camp, like all of those things that we grew up and we value and we want to provide for our children. It's like, I grew up in the 80s and like the cost of things in the 80s is a lot different than the cost of things in 2023, you know? And so, there's, again, the systems are broken. We have all of these external things that are making that a lot harder. But when we, again, are in a stress response, it's like, oftentimes we'll make it about ourselves because then at least we can control it.
Yeah.
But then it creates so much shame because it's like you actually can't control it.
Right.
It's a broken system. And so then I'm failing. And there's all this
shame spiraling.
Yes. And all of these like TikToks and everything on social media about how you can biohack your body or how you can like, be more productive. And it's like, no. You're going to end up feeling bad about yourself again because the system is broken.
Well, it seems like there's there may be more, but it seems like there's three responses. There's like the shame spiraling. There's like the, biohacking, like you say, like you just need to self-improve.
Yeah.
And then I think there's just like the outrage where we can just like, I'm just going to be angry and mad at everybody.
Yeah. Right. And then because at least then I feel safe.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Right.
And it's really stressful and it's really terrible for your body to be in a state of rage or shame or like trying to fix your body all the time. Like, it's just, when we get down to it, it's all about worth and belonging.
Yeah.
And that seems very simplistic, and it is such a hard thing to get to connect those pieces. And that, y'all, that's my jam. That's what I'm like really good at, like helping make those connections. I love it. And I think people are fascinating. And really helping people to dig down in there and figure that out without spiraling into shame and without, like, how can we feel rage and anger without it destroying our relationships or without it destroying our bodies? How do we, and grief and loss. Oh, so much grief and loss. How can we do that in a way that is cathartic, that is healing, that is building resiliency rather than tearing us down?
Right. Because it's like you're not saying like, oh, we shouldn't be angry and upset about injustice. We just can't like live out of that anger and injustice.
Right. It's like, how can I see this, and how can I work to change it from a place of, I am angry, but I am not full of rage.
Right.
I am not like actively, like I don't have a cortisol spike. I'm not like, my nervous system is up and amped. And that's sometimes that feels good. Sometimes it feels good to like yell and get it out, like protesting and things like that. Like that can be a very cathartic thing. And if you have a tremendous amount of stress in your life already, that can tip you over the edge where you then crash.
Yeah.
And then you can sink into a depression or, have panic attacks. There's all sorts of things that can come from too much of that. So it's for an individual person based on their physiology, like what is a good amount? Where's the balance? So, I mean, it's like food and exercise, like all our emotional stuff. We are physical beings and very complex.
Well, I want to keep this conversation going, but for sake of time, let's do this. I know you want everyone who's a pastor to go to Restore Clergy and check out your work and how they might be a part of it. But for those who, in the meantime, let's say, right, what are a couple, 3 things clergy can do for themselves?
So, well, let me start with what Restore Clergy offers, because we do have like a free monthly clergy chat. And so that's just a Zoom session. It's for an hour. It's on Wednesdays. It's 11 o'clock Pacific time. And that is just, you go to my website, restoreclergy.com, and you sign up for that. You get the link and you can show up if you want to. And we have different topics. But a lot of it is, I just want people to be able to bring what they're dealing with. And then we have a conversation around it. So conversation like this. Yeah. And who knows what might come from it. I have like I offer people a topic, but oftentimes we shift into other things, which I love. Because it's meeting the need that is showing up. And then I have the year-long program, and you can find out about that on the website too. And then I do different talks like this, the stress response talk here. But if none of those options are a good option, I think community is really important. And community outside of your little cluster, like we, especially as clergy and denominations, regions, annual conferences, I'm in the Methodist and Disciples system, so that's the language I have. But, most clergy gatherings, we can get competitive.
Slightly.
We can start talking about like numbers and how many people, and like this is all the programming, and maybe it's trying to focus on like, but what change are we actually doing? Yeah. And not necessarily even justice change. I think that's important, but sometimes it's really helpful to look at what kind of internal change are you noticing in yourself.
Yeah, because if we're just like sitting around, like I think this happens in mainline circles. I think it's just like we sit around and complain about like how our churches are dying, and we're like frustrated with the system. Right. Which to some point is cathartic, but like it doesn't really lead to any, I don't think, growth.
Right. Oftentimes we can leave those situations feeling worse. Yeah. And so then we avoid it. Yeah. And so then we're more isolated. Yeah. And so it's looking for spaces where there's more intentionality about what's your experience? What are you feeling or what are you thinking? How is that helpful? How is that impacting your ministry? What are you noticing in your people? But oftentimes we do just complain about how hard it is. And it's like, yes, that's true. And what do we do about that? Like, do we just stay stuck, and we're in this shame spiral and there's nothing to be done? Or can we get creative and start to experiment and think about it as, what if I showed up on Sunday and had an outline instead of a script? Could I work through that anxiety? Could I be in a place of, I'm going to allow some off the cuff movement of the spirit here? And, like some people are like, oh my God, there's so much anxiety around that, so maybe that's too big of a step.
Yeah.
But, just changing things up, like whatever feels rigid and locked and stuck, is there a way that you can make a shift? And that could be in your body, so it could be, I feel terrible. And like, the doctor's telling me I need to lose 50 pounds or I'm going to die or whatever. It's like, okay, that's intense.
Right.
Any kind of restriction and locking and loading is not going to be helpful. It's probably going to make it worse.
Right.
So is there a shift that feels expansive? Maybe I can think of moving my body as like a spiritual practice. Like I was talking about, like going outside, getting some sunshine, breathing fresh air, like walking. It doesn't have to be big, but it's like, where is that sweet spot of it is challenging and I feel the intention and the shift, but it doesn't feel so big that it's like, I'm not going to do that. Like in my best moments when I wake up and I've got my caffeine high, I'm like, yes, I will do this all the time. And it's
you're not going to have the willpower for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially in burnout. So
yeah. Well, this is good stuff here. Let's take a break and come back with some closing questions. And recommend folks check out her website, which is
www.restoreclergy.com.
Perfect. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back with Reverend Kinsie Tate. So I hope this conversation has been helpful for our listeners. I know it's been helpful for me, and I appreciate perspectives here. So these closing questions, you can take these. I always tell folks as seriously as you want. So if you're Pope for a day, what do you want to do? What's your big agenda?
So I was thinking about this, and mine is it's not a big agenda. It's more personal.
Okay.
So my undergrad was in art education, and it's like I want to see the like special Pope.
Oh yeah.
Like all the art,
all
the history, all of the things that the Vatican owns that is not public. Like that's what I want to do. I want to see like all the special Pope stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Like what was the stupid book, Dan Brown?
Da Vinci Code.
I mean, like, I'm sure there's some like super secret Da Vinci Code stuff in there, right? Like there's some element of truth in that would be pretty intriguing to check out. Historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
So I actually was thinking about this as I would like to bring Paul back to life, and not so much that I can ask him questions, but to get his perspective on where we are as the church.
Oh.
I would be really interested to hear, like, if he had any idea of the influence that he would have, how that makes him feel, knowing that maybe his work was interpreted in certain ways that are exclusionary and make people feel bad, rather than like helping them live into like who Jesus Christ is and all that kind of stuff. So again, from my therapist mindset, I'm like, ooh, I wonder what he thinks about that.
So I sort of think like Paul would be kind of like grumpy, super grumpy. What do you think? Like, he'd be like, you know, I think he'd be like rager, but also like, what I was just reading this passage. What is the passage where he kind of like talks about his own, when the flesh, there was some like awareness with him, right? Of his own brokenness.
Yeah. I honestly think he would be sad.
Oh,
yeah. I think he would be sad and potentially horrified by how his work was interpreted to exclude and to hurt people, because I mean, he was so passionate about Jesus, and was like, and we all as clergy have been in that space of like, yes, I feel the presence of God and like experience the beauty of Jesus Christ out in the world. And then you talk about it and people, like in the receiving line, it's like, oh, that's what you heard? That's really surprising. That is not what I meant to say, but that's really interesting.
I have been there.
Yeah.
I have been there.
Yeah.
Well, Kinsie here is kind of in a unique space for mainliner, like being pro Paul, I guess, Paul sympathetic.
And it's maybe because I'm not like preaching about his stuff all the time.
Right. Having to craft a sermon from that.
Right.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
I think we are in such a state of flux, and I think Dr. Thumma's research is really showing that, and even the Barna studies talking about where we are. I don't know how to predict that. I think we still need a good decade or so to really understand the impact of what we have been through as a collective globally, the impact of the pandemic. And just, the divisiveness and the vitriol that is in our society. I don't know. I hope that's not our legacy, but, maybe it will be. But I believe in I'm an optimist, if you can tell. And I believe in the power of the human spirit. And I believe that God is alive and active. And if we can deal with our stuff and get back into a place where we can experience that, beauty will come from this.
And I'm going to reframe that, if I may.
Yeah.
Because this has been really helpful for me. Henry Nouwen, if I'm getting this right, talked about hope not being simply optimism, but hope being based on God's past work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dr. Thumma talked about churches being optimistic, being better. And in our conference, that was kind of critiqued. Because I think fairly so, there does need to be some like processing of grief, which we'd agree. But like I was thinking about, like, he's a sociologist, he's not a theologian, he's not interpreting it, he's not thinking about it way. But also, like, I was thinking about, like, to me, I think it is important if a church is going to be like, we know that God has worked in our past in the midst, and we believe that God still has things to be done in our city. Like, that's a song, I think, right? Like, I don't think that's hope. That's not optimism to me. I think that's hope. And that's what I hear from you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's our faith too. It's that belief of this is not the end.
Right.
This is, yes, things are going to die, but there's resurrection on the other side of that, thinking about the church and the way that we do church and those, the rigidity that we have, maybe that needs to die so that something new can be reborn out of that. And I absolutely believe that is our history and it's going to repeat itself.
Yeah. So the last question I usually ask is like hope for the future of Christianity, but let me reframe that too. Like, what do you hope for pastors? What do you pray for pastors?
Man, I pray that they do not lose hope, that they know that they can realize that there are people out there that want to help them, that believe in what they do, see the beauty of it, and want to support them, and that they are brave enough to reach out to that and allow themselves to be vulnerable, find that safe space where they can just be human and not the pastor, and they can step back from their stuff so that they can become aware of it and begin to heal.
Good stuff. What's your website again? How people can get in touch with you?
It's restoreclergy.com. And yeah, all my information is there. So I hope people will reach out because I'm all for doing this work and I love it.
Awesome. Well, I always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
And with you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.